Okay, welcome back. This is part two. We're going to continue our discussion on change. My name is Gunnar Wettergren. We just finished part A, which is establishing the business context, and we're going to move on to part B, which is the pace and the scale of the change. So let's get started. All right, so one of the things that is very important is obviously to be clear about this. How quick do we need to do this? And what's the scale of the change? Is it the whole organization? Is it one department? Is it one group? Right? Because this sets the context for the planning. And it also gives us understanding of the scope of the project, how big it really is. Right? So ask yourself questions like how many people are affected by this change? How radical is it? Because the radical nature of the change influences the change in people, right? In a sense, if it's really radical, the attitudes and the behaviors in the organization have to change quite a bit, which is going to make your work to actually introduce the change into the organization harder. You have to work more with activities that change attitudes and different behaviors inside the organization. Right? So when we look at this, there's a time and a change matrix. This is one way to look at it. And it also gives us a kind of a suggestion on how to approach it. So if it's a radical type of change, which basically means it's a big change, for example, in the banking industry again, we went from having offices everywhere to having offices nowhere, and now everything is done using internet banking. This is a truly radical change. Right? If you look on a radical change from the short-term perspective, like 3 to 9 months, we have restructuring and redeployment of staff, kind of moving people around. That's one way of looking at it. If we look at the long term, over a year, we talk about things like business process re-engineering, where we actually redesign the way we do things. Right? It changes the processes, not just the people. When we look at incremental, meaning we do small changes step by step in order to reach a larger goal. Short term will be process refinement, kind of tweaking the process. It could be in a factory, it could be in an organization, it could be everywhere, right? But it deals with tweaking small changes over time that allows us to adjust and to adapt. And if you look long term, we talk about things like total quality management, innovation schemes, and so on, right? These are business process reengineering and total quality management are concepts that you just need to browse, maybe search for them online, get a feeling for what they are. There's nothing central about those for this course in particular. That's a whole different course. All right. And now we come to planning. So now that was that about pace and scale, which it's important to identify. It's important to bring that with us into the planning and planning process, so that we can actually make a plan that's sensible and that takes the resistance to change into account. Because at the end of the day, this is quite often forgotten about. So let's start by making a comparison between change projects and traditional projects. Right? So let's start with the similarities. Right? Standard disciplines, still valid. The things that we've talked about, that we'll be talking about, is the planning and measuring of things, estimating effort, the leadership parts, the involvement of users. Those are all things that you will find in both camps. Right? But at the end of the day, there are some major differences, and I think this is what makes it somewhat tricky. Since in a project, you as a project manager not only have to deal with running the project, but you also have to deal with implementing the change nowadays. It really wasn't like that maybe 15, 20 years ago, or even 10 years ago. But nowadays the product manager is becoming more and more a change manager. And this is something that the research and maybe the methodology for projects has not taken into account. We're kind of lacking, or kind of we need to move quicker and catch up methodology wise. Okay. The thing with change projects is that they may vary. I mean, I'm sure you've at some point heard that everyone has an agenda, and this is connected to that. So, for example, if a change is introduced in an organization, it might affect me differently than you. I mean, the new working procedures might be for someone, but not for everyone. The behavior that we're trying to change, might be for one group, but not for another group. And to measure this is a lot more challenging, right? So the goal is different depending on who you talk to, or which group of people you talk to, for example. And this makes it obviously a lot harder. Because we don't, things like traditional product goals, like new system, measurable progress, time and resource estimation, are obviously easier, right? We want to build a system that does X, Y, Z. Compare that to, we want to introduce a change into the organization that makes our behavior and our attitude towards the customer more pleasant and more positive. Obviously, there's a huge change here. And there's a huge difference in complexity. So this is important to remember. So if we put it up, a versus comparison, change program versus traditional projects. In a change program, we see the goal is keeps moving. There's not set goal. I'm not saying that it always is a set goal in projects either, but it's at least not moving as much, right? We're introducing new behaviors. And an interesting part, the program itself, or the change that we're trying to implement itself, will cause change, right? The fact that we talk about this, the fact that we're involving people, the fact that we're bringing the ideas and opinions of our employees into the mix changes the dynamics. In traditional products, we see a scope that is more contained. Even though we nowadays talk quite a bit about the problem of setting goals in organizations in general, and in products in particular, we still have a limited number of goals that we can see, right? And we do have some sort of time plan. We can measure progress, right? How do you measure progress of a change that's being implemented? This could be over years, right? I mean, introducing a behavioral change or a cultural change is going to be, it's hard to say if it's going to take 1 month, 6 months, or 2 years. In a project, well, granted, it's quite hard there as well, but at least we have a better chance because we do have a plan and we have a set scope of what we're supposed to deliver, at least. So, and all of this comes down to what's called the resistance to change, right? It's inherent in all human beings, one could say. I mean, we're essentially not very happy when things are changing. So we're kind of from get-go negatively inclined towards change. So one could say it's a law of nature. You know, we don't like change. Period. There are different types of resistance, of course, phases, and so let's jump into these. There's an innate paradox in this, because change offers opportunities, but it also offers threats, right? I mean, if you look at a standard SWOT analysis, this is quite easy to carry out, and you will find that any change brings with it some opportunities and some threats. And people perceive this differently. Some people see this as, hey, this is an opportunity for me to further myself or my agenda. Or this is a danger to my agenda. And obviously this is going to affect how you react to change differently. Right? So being right is not enough. We need to bring the people into this. We need to understand that there are different motivations why people act and do what they do before we can be successful in implementing a change into an organization. Alright, so there are different types of resistance. There's an active type, which explicitly you voice your opinion, you actively work against this change, so it's quite obvious, right? It's very visible. But then there's the passive one, which is a little bit more tricky. And if you take a look at Daryl Connor in the link that's provided, you'll find some interesting theory around this. And but the passive resistance to change is the discussions over the coffee that never really gets to the group that's trying to change something, or the way you act, or the way you try and counter the change by adjusting how you act, or negatively affect the change by acting in a different way, and so on. Something that is not obvious to the group that's trying to implement the change or the organization is the passive approach, of course, right? Then there are different phases, of course, in any change that you'll find. There's the denial phase, where we deny that it's going to change, it's going to affect us. There's the resistance phase, where we start to resist the change and say, well, hang on a second, this is not good, this is a bad idea, let's do something about this, let's not change, and so on. There's the exploration phase, where okay, so this is going to happen, let's explore how this could actually be, how I can benefit from this, or how I can use it. Right? There's the confidence phase, where we realize, hey, this could actually be quite good. Why don't I, this change is not all that bad. So, this is another way to look at it. But these phases are important in a sense where it identifies how you should kind of organize, how you should work with change in an organization. You want to get people to a place where they can see that the change is actually going to benefit them. But you have to be smart about this. How can we get to a point where we can convince people that this change is not bad? It's actually going to help us. It's going to make your situation better. And the key to doing that is connecting it to things that people care about, to their own agenda, to understand how people function and how they work, and what the workings or the processes around the individuals and their agendas work. I suggest you take a look at this picture. You can pause the video right here and take a look at this. Read through it. It's one way of looking at it. There are various phases here as well. And as you'll notice is that there are many different versions of this. Okay, so that's the end of part 2, and I'll see you back in the part 3 when we're going to talk a little bit more about the product manager and change.